So a very warm welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar on how to get published in a scholarly journal, top tips from the publisher. So this is run by Lydia Briggs, she will introduce herself to you in a second. So this is the first webinar out of our new webinar series we launched this year. We are tackling challenges and topics around research planning, research execution, evaluation, and promotion. And we have a 12-month agenda will be launched on our website. We will share with you afterwards. So you'll find upcoming webinars on our website. And before I'm going to give the words to Lydia, to the speaker, let me just quickly mention who we are. Not everyone might be aware who Elsevier is. So Elsevier is one of the largest analytical company and publisher on scientific and medical and technical content globally. So we publish quite a lot of content. Actually, 20% roughly on the world global content we do publish. So we do see a lot of do's and don'ts and pitfalls people step into. So we receive about 2 million submissions each year, which are resulting into about 500,000 of publications. So we would like to help you get your paper accepted without falling into the traps along the way. And this is why we run this seminar, to help you get published, basically. So Lydia, if you would like to introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michaela. So my name is Lydia Briggs. I'm a senior publisher at Elsevier. I primarily look after the applied biochemistry journals, but I have worked across many different subject areas over the course of my career and worked at different publishers as well. So hopefully I can give you a few perspectives across different subjects too. Do you want to go over the learning outcomes now, Michaela?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant.
So what are we going to cover today? So we will give you a sneak preview behind the curtains, as we say. So just tell you a bit more on how we work, how a scientific publisher works. We will touch upon topics such as how to select the right journals to publish your research in. We also touch on author responsibilities and ethical considerations. So who was an author? Was the first author, for example? How you could effectively structure a research article. And then the peer review process. This is not a black hole, so we will also shed some light on how it works, how you can respond to reviewer feedback, for example, and also guidance on how to avoid these common mistakes. We do see a lot to increase the likelihood of you getting published, of your paper getting accepted. And with this, I would like to hand over to you, Lydia.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Michaela. I should say before I begin as well, I've got a bit of a chest infection coming, so apologies if I cough or sound very throaty. So to begin, why publish and why keeping your ideas to yourself isn't enough? So you may have your own reasons for wanting to publish, to get promoted, to get funded, or to complete your PhD, but the editors, reviewers, and the research community are only really interested in your content. It really is the content that counts. You need to think of the needs of the as an author, you need to think of the needs of the reader, and you only publish a paper to give an answer to a question. You're often continuing the conversation from people who have published papers before you, and you're continuing that research onwards. So some questions to answer before you start writing. Is your research new and interesting? Is it a current hot topic or an emerging topic? Have you provided solutions to some difficult problems? And are you ready to publish at this point? i.e., do you have enough sufficient data to be able to publish? If you answer yes to all of these questions, then you can begin preparations for your manuscript. So think about whether you have enough data to support a full-length article. If you have something that's really exciting, a preliminary result that you need to share as soon as possible, consider publishing a short communication. Perhaps you have a really interesting case in your clinic. You might want to publish a case report in that case. Or if you're a leader in your field, you might consider publishing a review article or giving your perspective on a subject area. Maybe you have some other research elements that you would like to publish, such as a data in brief article, which describe and provide access to research data, or a Methods X article, which outlines new innovations in methods. Consider whether you need to publish open access or not. Some institutions require it and some funders require it. So is that the case for you? And does the journal offer an open access option, or is it open access itself? I would recommend always asking your supervisor or colleagues for advice on the manuscript type, especially if you're unsure. They will often see things more clearly than you do. So what makes a strong manuscript? Typically, strong manuscripts share all of these attributes. So they have a novel, clear, useful and exciting message. They're presented and constructed in a logical manner, and therefore the reviewers, editors can grasp the scientific significance easily. Remember that editors and reviewers are all busy scientists within their own right, so make things easy to save their time as often as you can throughout the process. So identifying the right journal and writing for it. Before you start, gather all your content, your results, lab notes, observations, methods, insights from previous research, any multimedia content, and importantly, your references. With everything in one place, you can better organize your thoughts and plan your article. Then the first place to look is your references. These will help you narrow your candidate journal choices down. Then for each candidate journal, take a look at recent publications to see what topics they're covering and what article types they publish. If you're looking to publish a rapid communication, for instance, but that journal doesn't offer that article type, then you may want to look elsewhere to publish that particular article. Look at other metrics like the speed of publication or the impact metrics to see if they meet your expectations. And again, if you need to publish open access, does it have suitable open access options, or is it fully open access itself? Then follow the Think, Check, Submit guidelines. Does the journal exist? What is its reputation? Where is it indexed? And are you looking at the genuine website for the journal and not just a cloned very similar site? So before you click that submit button, make sure you absolutely are looking at the genuine journal site and you're happy with making that decision. It is important to select an appropriate journal so that your work will reach the intended audience. If your paper is outside the scope of a journal, it will likely be rejected immediately by the editors, not because of the quality of the work, but just because it doesn't fit with the topic of the journal. So it's worth getting it right the first time. When investigating a topic or a candidate journal, remember that there is more than Google. You also have access to Scopus, which is the largest curated abstract and citation database of peer-reviewed literature. And you may also have access to the Web of Science. In Scopus, you can visualize your results, something you can't do with Google, and you can see how many documents or articles have been published on that topic and where they have been published, such as the country, institution, the journal, and when those papers were published as well. For huge topics like COVID-19, using advanced search strategies, such as using Booleans in Scopus, will help narrow your searches and refine your candidate list of journals and see which journals are publishing on your specific topic. But of course, Google can be helpful. Make sure to utilize Google Scholar advanced searches, and remember that you can use some of these proximity operators within the other more sophisticated tools that you may have access to, such as PubMed, Web of Science, and Scopus and Science Direct. At Elsevier, we also have the Journal Finder tool. So this is where you can copy in your abstract and title, and then you'll get recommendations of the journals that might best suit your research. For each of those, you can see the metrics, such as the site score, the impact factor, the acceptance rate, and the time to first decision and publication. So that will help you narrow your list against your expectations. If you're very early in the writing phase and you don't have your abstract and title yet, you can use one of these sample abstract and titles to see what journals at Elsevier might be applicable in that general area of research. So yeah, the link's there and you'll get that afterwards. So each journal typically has a guide for authors, which with specific details for the preparation of your manuscript. To save authors time, many journals at Elsevier use Your Paper Your Way for first submissions. So this means that you can submit your article in a PDF or in some other editable file format in any style, including the reference styles, the references rather. But you must apply the style, the guide for authors style to your manuscript during revisions and before acceptance. The guide for authors can help within with the text layout, reference style, artwork quality, figures, tables, and other important items. So it's really worth reading. It will save you time along with the editors and reviewers if applied earlier on in the process. And this is, yeah, let's come up. So that's just an example of the guide for authors. Depending on your publication strategy and institutional requirements, you may also like to look at the journal metrics shown on the screen here. We're not going to go into loads of details here. The two most important and most well-known, or more well-known, are the impact factor and the site score. They are used to measure the importance of a journal by calculating the number of times selected articles are cited within specified time points. The higher the impact factor or site score, the more highly ranked the journal. It is one tool you can use to compare journals in a subject category. Publishing in prestigious or highly ranked journals may help reach many readers and boost your career. Top journals tend to have a more thorough review process and a larger readership. The wider readership may help with citations, which is a key criterion for getting tenure. The more important the journal, the higher the circulation will be, and your article will be seen by more eyes and therefore has more chance of being influential. The downside of aiming at highly ranked journals is it's much harder to get published, since they typically only accept the top 1% of all research. So if your paper doesn't contain groundbreaking research, you may want to consider submitting to a good journal with a slightly higher acceptance rate. I've included a checklist here, a kind of consolidated list of questions that you might want to ask yourself before publication, which we have discussed some of these. Something to point out is in some subject areas, such as economics, there are submission fees or page charges. So that's something that you should definitely have a look at before submitting to a journal, so that there's no surprises when you come to submit or your paper is accepted and you didn't realize that it was open access and that there's an article publication charge associated with that journal. So hopefully this will help you narrow your list and make sure that you're going to publish somewhere that meets all of your requirements. So now you have your list of candidate journals. For your manuscript, you must agree this list of journals with all of your co-authors and the order in which you will submit to those journals. Please don't gamble by submitting to more than one journal at a time. This is a breach of publication ethics and is prohibited. Editors will find out either through the automated tools in the submission system or by the reviewers themselves, having been invited to both papers. And then those reviewers will speak to their respective editors, who will speak to each other. Yeah, you will be found out. So it's just not worth the risk. This will also avoid duplicate or redundant publication, which is when two or more papers are published that are identical or near identical in the information presented. There are some exceptions, such as translations. So if you've published in a local language journal that doesn't have a huge circulation, you may submit to an English language journal as a translation, but then whatever is published, you will also have attributed back to the original publication. So it will be listed as a translated article rather than an original paper. Some editors don't like publishing translated articles because they are just concerned with publishing original research. So it really does depend on a journal by journal and case by case basis on whether that will be accepted or not. Also, as an author, you may want to publish something that's highly technical, but communicate it to the general public through the popular press. And again, you will have to attribute back to the original article because it is not an original publication. So who is an author, which is more complex than it first seems on the surface? So there are various different policies around what constitutes authorship. The most common example is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, or the Vancouver Group. And they state that an author must substantially contribute to the conception and design or acquisition of data, or analysis and interpretation of the data. They must draft the article or revise it critically for important intellectual content and give their approval of the final full version to be published, and agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that the questions related to accuracy and integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. You must meet all 4 of these conditions to be considered an author. So determining the order of authors on a paper can vary per discipline and culture. Disagreements about the order of author names on a research paper can get heated at times, and also can soak up a lot of time with editors and the editorial office if they're not resolved before submission. Sometimes they come up during publication or after publication, and it really does cause a lot of problems, and corrections needed after publication are always can be problematic. So in many academic fields, the first or prime authorship of a paper indicates that this person has provided the majority of the work or the biggest intellectual contribution to the research. It is quite a prestigious position, as the work will be primarily attributed to the first author. The general rule is that the first author is the person who conducts or supervises the data collection, analysis, presentation, interpretation of the results, and also puts together the paper for submission. The corresponding author can be the first author, or is typically a senior researcher or academic. Fundamentally, a corresponding author takes the lead in the manuscript submission process, where the first author is actually the one who did the research and wrote the manuscript. Co-authors are anyone who has made a significant contribution to the article, as outlined in the ICMJE guide, for instance. They also share responsibility and accountability for the results. And as an author, you should be in a position to discuss and defend any aspect of the work at a future point should any questions be raised about it. Please always avoid ghost authorship, which means excluding authors who have made a substantial contribution to the research and you've left them off the paper. And also avoid gift authorship, which is a very common unethical behaviour seen in academic publishing. So this is where a random person has been added as an author, maybe to reward a collaboration or return a favour, or for some other gain. So they don't actually constitute being an author, but they have been included in the authorship list. So please also avoid that. If somebody has contributed, financially or something like that, they can be added to the acknowledgements list rather than the author list, and we'll come to that in a bit. So remember, as authors, we have lots of rights and privileges, but we also have the responsibility to be ethical. So on to structuring your article. Hopefully some of these tips will make it a bit easier. So research articles contain many sections, and each one has a defined purpose. At the beginning are the title, abstract, and keyword sections, which all play an important role in allowing the articles to be easily found, indexed, and advertised to potential readers. Make these sections informative, attractive, and effective so that the article is easy to index and search. Next, the main text of the article is where you must present your work and convey the main messaging and findings effectively. Please note that the reader's time is not unlimited. Make your article as concise as possible and your message as clear as possible, which will hopefully make your article quite impactful too. Lastly, we have a group of sections, the conclusions, acknowledgements, references, and supporting materials. However, these are artificial groupings, and some journals require that the discussion be combined with the conclusions or results, but others need them to be independent sections. So please do read the guide for authors to see how you need to structure those final few sections. Now let's take a look at the process of building an article. The sequence of writing the article is not the same as reading it. For most scientific fields, the most efficient way is to regard the manuscript as a wall and build it brick by brick. You start with producing your tables and figures with caption legends, so your data. Then describe the methods used, the results found, and the discussion around these results. The conclusions should flow on from this fairly easily, and then you can write the introduction as to where your work fits into the field as a whole. Finally, you can write the title, abstract, and keywords. This process of building the article is easier, more logical, and more effective than trying to write an article in the sequence that it's read. And I kind of wish that I'd known this when I was at university. It would have saved me a lot of late nights. So, where to start? Firstly, decide what you want to share. What is the story you are trying to tell, and what are the main findings to include to tell it? Therefore, do not include all of your findings in your paper. Think about your message. You should present the results that are essential to the discussion section, which means that only data of primary importance should be shared. Data of secondary importance should be put in the supplementary materials section. However, do not attempt to hide data in the hope of saving it for a later paper, or split the results of one project into multiple papers, as this will dilute the effect of your work and may result in lower quality papers. You may also lose evidence that reinforces your conclusions or arguments. Use subheadings to keep results of the same type together. This will make the results easier to review and read. You may want to number these sections for the convenience of internal cross-referencing, but do check the individual journal requirements, as some journals specify that an unnumbered style should be used. Decide on a logical order of the data that tells a clear story. Highlight findings that further the understanding in the field and any that differ from previous findings, and explain any unexpected results. Next, go about creating your figures and tables. Your data are the driving force behind the paper. Therefore, your figures and illustrations are critical, and they should be used for essential data only, as mentioned. The legend of a figure should be brief, and it should contain sufficient explanatory details to explain the figure without the need to refer to the text. Use colour only when necessary. If different line styles can be used to clarify the meaning, then don't use colour or other thrilling effects, as it will distract from the content and may not appear properly when printed in black and white. Using symbols will also make your paper much more accessible for those who have colour blindness too. Graphs are often used to compare experimental results with those of previous works or with calculated theoretical values. Graphs should not appear crowded. Try to present at most 3 to 4 data sets per figure. Use well-selected scales, label the axes clearly, and use different symbols so that one can quickly discriminate between data sets. Often tables give the actual experimental results, but try not to include long, boring tables unless absolutely necessary. Otherwise, put them in the supplementary material section for people to refer to if they need to, but make them as easy to read as possible. Every photograph or image should be presented with a scale marker, and the resolution should be clear. If you include any figures from other publications, be sure to seek permission to reuse these and include any attribution details in the figure legend also. Next, lay out the methods used to obtain your results. It is important to be detailed here. A knowledgeable reader should be able to reproduce your experiment. Any previously published procedures shouldn't be rewritten in detail. Those can be noted in the references or described in supporting materials section. The equipment and materials used in experiments should be identified along with their sources if there is a chance for any variability of quality of these items. If the work is computational or theoretical or code, computational or analytical methods should be described. If your work involves experiments on humans or animals, it must follow applicable ethical standards, such as the most recent version of the Helsinki Declaration and/or local, national, and international animal experimentation guidelines. Approval from a local ethics committee is required and should always be specified at this point in the manuscript. There may be places in the submission system and in the covering letter that you might want to include this information too. However, please note that even if you have approval from a local ethical committee, it doesn't guarantee that the editor will also agree that the work has been carried out in an acceptable manner. Okay. So onto the discussion section, which is where you will interpret what your results mean. This is the most important section of your article. It is where you get the chance to sell your data. A huge number of manuscripts are rejected because the discussion is weak or only includes a mere description of the experimental results. Make sure the discussion corresponds to and complements the results, but don't repeat the results here. Compare other published results with your own and do not ignore work that is in disagreement with yours. Confront it and convince the reader that you are correct or better, but of course, back it up with evidence. Be careful not to use the following: statements that go beyond what the results can support, non-specific expressions such as higher temperature or at a lower rate. Use quantitative descriptions instead. Avoid using new terms that are not already defined or mentioned in your paper. And avoid speculations on possible interpretations that are based on imagination rather than rooted in fact and carefully explained in the manuscript. If you need to revise the results or discussion, this may involve a lot of work and require some further experiments or simulations. Sometimes you may not be able to clarify your idea just in words because some critical items have not been studied substantially. So make sure your message is complete before you start writing or submit your manuscript. The conclusion is used to show how your work advances the field. Be clear in the conclusion to help the reviewer and editor judge your work and its impact, but don't tell them what you think the impact is. Provide clear justification for how your work advances the field. This can be achieved by indicating uses, extensions, or applications of the work. Don't just repeat the abstract here. They have different purposes, although some of the same messages may be mentioned. Also, don't list the experimental results here. Trivial restatements of your results are unacceptable in this section. Suggest future experiments that build on your work and point out any relevant experiments that may already be underway. At this point, you will be in a position to write your introduction. The introduction is used to provide context for your manuscript and convince readers why your work advances a field of study and why it's important to them. Be concise in the introduction, but give the reader enough information to understand why the work is important. Introductions to letters may be shorter, maybe just a paragraph. This section shouldn't be a history lesson, but you do need to introduce the main scientific publications on which your work is based. So cite a few original and important works, maybe a few review articles, to give the reader a sense of how your work fits into the literature. However, take care not to make citations to irrelevant references, including your own. Make sure you clearly address the following. What is the problem you're ultimately trying to solve? Identify the solutions and limitations. Are there any solutions? If so, what is the best solution? Excuse me. And what are its limitations? What is your work trying to achieve? Provide a perspective that is consistent with the journal if possible when you are submitting. Although it can be tempting to reuse introductions from your previous papers on similar studies, every paper should present a new result, and the work should be specifically motivated. Therefore, it requires a unique introduction every time. Now you have the bulk of your paper written, you can compose the title that represents it effectively. Unlike headlines in magazines and newspapers, your reader wants to know exactly what your paper adds to the field. So identify the main issue of the paper and its subject. Including too much detail in the title is a common mistake. Typically, this is when an author wants to cram too much information into the title, or they're unclear about their main message. Sometimes they may have several messages that they want to communicate in one go rather than just focusing on the central message of their article. The title should be as short as possible and as easy to comprehend. A study found that papers get more views and citations if the title contains fewer than 95 characters, which is quite incredible. Don't use rarely used abbreviations, and always consider the audience of the journal you intend to publish in. If it is read by biologists, geologists, chemists, and physicists alike, you need to make sure that all of them can understand your title. Don't underestimate the importance of your title. This, together with the abstract, can be the most difficult part of your paper to write. Remember, editors and reviewers don't like titles that make no sense or fail to represent the subject matter adequately. And maybe even more importantly, you want the appropriate audience to read your paper. If the title isn't accurate, the right people may not read your article, and the community may be unaware of your work. This could even lead to lower citations than your paper deserves. It is advisable to discuss the title with your co-authors before you submit your article, so you don't have to change it during review. Sometimes editors will ask you to tweak your title during peer review. So try and avoid this before submitting. Then, if the title catches a reader's attention, the next thing they check is the abstract. Abstracts are freely available in electronic abstracting and indexing services such as PubMed, Medline, Embase, and Scopus. And they strongly influence whether a reader will download your article for a closer look. In the abstract, you tell the readers the important findings. The abstract should be one paragraph and should summarize the problem, the methods, the results, and the conclusions. Most journals require a word limit of under 300 words per abstract. So this example of an abstract, you can see that there's two sections. The different journals have different requirements, but the two whats are essential. What has been done and what are the main findings? Try to make it interesting and easy to understand without reading the whole article. Remember to avoid using jargon and uncommon abbreviations if possible. Many authors write the abstract last so that it accurately reflects the contents of the paper. In an electronic world, keywords determine whether your article is found or not. Avoid words that have broad meaning. You don't want to be hidden in a sea of millions of unrelated articles not being found or read. There are a few things in your power to help an article climb up the search engine rankings, and that all comes down to keywords. So how to select the best keywords for a manuscript? Only use abbreviations that are firmly established in the field of study, such as DNA or radar. Check the guide for authors for specifics on which abbreviations are acceptable. Look at the keywords of articles relevant to your manuscript and play with these keywords in the search engines of your choice. So here we've got a Scopus example. And then see what results they return. Are they returning relevant papers? How many results are there? You really want to aim for something where there's a good number of results, but not too many, so your paper will stand out. At the end of the paper, you can use the acknowledgements to include the names of the important entities you want to acknowledge, such as advisors, financial supporters, and proofreaders, or your friends and family who kept you in coffee whilst you were writing up your experiment. Take note that most journals now also require a conflict of interest statement to be placed just after the acknowledgement section and before the references. So on to the references. The reference list is where you cite the main scientific publications on which you based your work. Some tips for having a proper reference list are: do not include too many references, especially if they're only tangentially related to your work. Always ensure that you have fully absorbed and understood the material you are referencing. Don't just rely on reading excerpts or isolated sentences. Know what you're referencing. Often reviewers and editors are extremely well read in their subject area, and they will pick up if you've misquoted something. Avoid excessive self-citations of your own work or from a single region or institution. Try to make sure that you've got a really good range of resources that you've based your work on. And then check the guide for authors to ensure that the proper referencing format is used. So this would be during revisions, you can do that. And then work smart, not hard. So to ensure that you're complying, you can use one of these referencing software. So I've used the EndNote tool before, which is a real lifesaver. So especially when you're using a numbered reference list, if you move something in the text, it will move it in your reference list, so you don't go insane trying to sort out your references when you're on a submission deadline. So yeah, I would really recommend using one of these services. And remember, presentation in the correct format is the responsibility of the author, not the editor. So try to make your editor's work easier. They really will appreciate the effort. And remember, nobody gets it right first time. So write and rewrite. Don't rush after writing a first version. Take several days of rest. Come back with a critical, fresh view. Ask colleagues and your supervisor to review your manuscript and ask them to be highly critical, and importantly, be open to their criticism and their suggestions. Make changes to incorporate their comments and suggestions as well. And then once you've revised your paper, make sure that all of the co-authors approve that version to be submitted. And as we said, the journal which you're going to submit to first off. Then you're ready to submit your article. So let's take a closer look at peer review, what it is, why it matters, how it works. Putting your article through peer review can feel like running the gauntlet. Hopefully we can demystify some of the process over the next few minutes. I like this illustration. So peer review is the filter that is used to evaluate the quality, judge the significance, and determine the originality of the research. The process also helps to improve the quality of the paper and make sure your research is communicated effectively. One of the many jobs of a publisher is to facilitate the review process by investing in and developing, maintaining and upgrading the online review system and tools available to authors, editors and reviewers. So this is what the peer review process typically looks like. Once you submit your article to a journal, there'll be some technical checks that are carried out, and then your paper will pass to the editor or the editor-in-chief. They may then send your paper to a handling editor who has more specific expertise, who then may also triage your paper at that point. If the basic acceptance criteria is met, other scientists, the peers in peer review, will be invited to assess the paper in more detail and provide feedback on your article. They'll recommend to the editor whether or not they think your paper is suitable for publication in its current form or not. And then the editor will send you a recommendation, either accept, reject, or revise. This is the view that the editor-in-chief will see in Editorial Manager, one of the systems used at Elsevier to handle the peer review process. Here you can see that the duplicate submission check is what the editor can see. So this shows whether the paper is has already been submitted somewhere else within the same journal and across journals within the same publisher. This tool is also being developed for across publisher checks as well, so that will be a future development. You can also see the manuscript analysis services. So this is where the authenticate plagiarism check sits. And then Elsevier editors also have some more information, such as the novelty check, so they can see the more recent publications published on the same topic as the paper submitted. They can also have they have like a scope match score, so they can see how well the paper submitted actually fits the journal, what has already been published in the journal, and then also how well the paper submitted might fit with other journals connected to it through our transfer program. So a note on the plagiarism detection tools. So many publishers have these tools, many have Authenticate or Crosscheck as it was known. And this means that your paper, when submitted, is checked against a database of over 50 million articles, and that database is updated all the time with the newly published articles on the internet. Plagiarism also comes to light through editors and reviewers reading the paper. Often they're very well read in the area, as I mentioned, and will recognise the text of others. Your colleagues may flag things as readers if the paper gets published, if it hasn't been detected during review, and increasingly papers come into question from whistleblowers or via sites like PubPeer. And yes, you can be accused of plagiarizing yourself, even though it was unintentional, which is the case most of the time. This is called self-plagiarism, and you can be suspended or expelled from school if found responsible for that. So this gives you a look at what the Authenticate tool would flag up for plagiarism. So the same colors highlight the same text that's being copied across the two papers. So it's very easy for the editor to see, okay, this is a verbatim copy. It's okay sometimes to include short phrases that are copied, as long as you're quoting them. If you're publishing like a chunk, make sure that your citations are all included there. But this level of copying is unacceptable. If it is determined that your article has breached ethical standards of publication and the study cannot be relied upon, so this is, you've gone through peer review, you've been published, and then this comes to light, your paper will be retracted from the journal. As your paper previously formed part of the scholarly record and others may have cited it, the retracted paper remains online and watermarked like this. And then a link is given to the retraction statement, so readers are aware of why the paper has been retracted. So if you navigated to this paper through another reference list, that reader would know that that paper had been retracted rather, and know that they can't rely on that information that has been cited in that other paper. Ethical breaches do tend to catch up with people and affect their established careers, such as these examples. I know of individuals who have also had their PhDs stripped from them due to the seriousness of the breach. So it really, truly isn't worth taking the chance of engaging in any of these unethical behaviours. So figure manipulation. So some things are allowed. In general, it's appropriate to adjust the brightness, balance, or contrast. But if you've done any of this, you need to mention it in the figure legend. You need to be really upfront about it. One word of advice here, always keep the original unaltered file available in case the journal requests it. And also store this for as long as you can afterwards. I would suggest several years, because these things tend to come back to authors in the future. If you cannot produce the original file, the journal will likely reject your submission, or if you've been published and you can't produce the file, your paper may be retracted or have an expression of concern added to it because you can't produce that file to show how how it's been altered. You should also note which software tools were used to make those adjustments too. So just try to be really transparent with anything like this. So more commonly these days, which is unfortunate, authors try to pass off the same figures from stating that they're different experiments. You can see here, if you turn your head 180 degrees, that the middle panel has been flipped over and then put in a new journal article. So journals now do have image manipulation detection tools too, that are used during submission and also used for ad hoc cases that are brought to us once a paper has been published. Often the reviewers or readers will flag issues with images and then we'll investigate further. So this is really quite unbelievable. So please don't try and get away with anything like this. So you're through the gauntlet. Now you've received your decision. It is very uncommon for a paper to be accepted for publication without changes, mostly for invited reviews that have had lots of pre-submission polishing. More commonly, you'll be rejected or asked to make some revisions. If DAS rejected, fear not. It's a very, very common decision. It can be because your paper is out of scope for the journal that you've submitted to, or the language in the paper needs to be polished a bit further to make the science understandable for review. Or it could be that the paper doesn't reach the novelty level required for that particular journal. Editors don't like sending papers for review that they will likely end up rejecting. And this also annoys the reviewers. The editor could have used those reviewers for another paper that would have been accepted. Reviewers may decide not to review for a journal anymore if they keep receiving poor papers from that editor that should have been DAS rejected. So editors do not tend to send out poor or marginal papers if they can avoid it, to maintain an engaged reviewer list, especially at the moment where editors are saying it's so difficult to find engaged reviewers. They really don't want to send anything to someone who's a regular reviewer that is just going to be rejected and should be DAS rejected. DAS rejections are usually accompanied by a brief comment from editors. And if the article is out of scope, the editor will usually recommend the most appropriate journal for you to submit to, or point you to the journal finder tool if it's an Elsevier submission. It's important to choose the right journal in the first place to try and avoid this pitfall. Reject after review. So just a note here, so some journals don't have major revisions. They only have reject and resubmit. If so, they really do want to receive your resubmission, but they're just giving you some more times to do the major work needed on your paper before it can be sent back into peer review. One or more of the reviewers may recommend rejection, and then if only one reviewer has recommended rejection, the editor makes the final and ultimate decision on every paper. You will get a lot of comments after review, so take these on board and try again, either with a brand new resubmission or a new submission elsewhere. Quite often the journal will request revisions and the paper will be returned to you and a deadline given to complete the revision. If the deadline is not suitable for you, please get in touch with the editorial office or the editor straight away to request an extension, as these are considered. Don't leave it to the last minute and then realise that you can't resubmit or anything. So do just get in touch and ask for an extension. So there are different kinds of revisions. So a major revision, for major revisions, you're more likely to get one of these decisions, especially if you're earlier in your career. Often more experiments are needed or a major rewrite. It's likely to involve a considerable amount of work on your part, so you'll need to decide if it is worth your while. it really is best to make the effort and resubmit rather than ignoring the comments and trying to submit to a different journal in its original form. Quite often the same reviewers will be invited to review that paper, and then the reviewer will notify the editor that they just reviewed it for this other journal and you've not made any changes, and then that editor may just reject your paper outright. The editor should use the previous reviewers to assess your revisions, so you will not receive additional changes in round 2, only if you've not made sufficient changes to the original comments that you previously received. And try to see revisions as an opportunity. It's great free advice given to you with the express aim of making your paper better. So try to be in that mindset when you're revising your article. Minor revisions are really just minor tweaks to grammar, references, journal style. They're used when no additional experiments are needed, and there are a few comments on the scientific content of the paper. Usually you'll have 5 to 10 days to return your revisions, but again, if you need more time, then please do get in touch to request a revision, and that will be taken into consideration. It's best to get these revisions done without argument, as this is effectively an accept decision if you make the changes sufficiently as requested. Do the revisions quickly, and then your paper will still be fresh in the editor's mind, so they may be able to make a much quicker final decision. Editors like to get papers like this done and dusted quickly. So yeah, do take advantage of that. So you've got the reviewer comments back. What next? So stay calm. Remember, everyone goes through this. Your colleagues, your supervisor, the editor themselves, and the reviewers themselves have all been through it. It really is how you handle it that is the important thing. You're bound to feel a little bit emotional because it's your baby, your project that you've worked really hard on. But do not make any knee-jerk responses. You really will regret them. Read and reread the comments. This sounds obvious, but read them thoroughly, every last one. Take note of what the reviewers have said, not what you think they have said or what you want to hear. It's useful to get someone else to read the comments, ask them to tell you what they have understood from the feedback you've received. This helps you to hear what is really meant and gives you moral support and advice too. This is especially helpful if the referee comments are complicated. Quite often you'll receive a kind of essay back from the reviewers rather than a kind of structured point by point list of changes. So talking through this with someone will really help you tease out all of the points that you need to take on board. And you'll also need your co-authors to read the reviewer comments too. Then take a break, let things sink in for a day or two. This gives you time to clear your head, digest what you need to do, and calm down if you're feeling a little bit upset. Then you can get practical. This is just a suggestion. So one way of handling this is you could draw up a table to list each of the points that you need to address for both sets of reviewers, however minor, to make sure that you've covered absolutely everything and you don't fall into the trap of the reviewer saying, oh, well, they've just disregarded this change that I requested. So make sure that you cover off all of the points when you're making your revisions. So this, yeah, it's fine, I said all those. Then I would recommend dealing with the minor comments first. So things like grammatical errors, putting things into journal style or typos. Getting them out of the way will make the picture much clearer for what remains to be done. Do you need to, the important issues that you need to focus on. Getting these little things done first will also give you a sense of achievement and boost your morale. Your revisions are underway and you're making progress. Then deal with the major comments. So set about addressing the comments that may require the most additional work and have a knock-on effect to other issues. So do you need to book more lab time, rerun experiments, all of those kinds of things? Do you need to reorder some reagents or something? this will really help you plan the next steps. Then begin drafting your response letter. When you resubmit your paper, it needs to be accompanied by a response letter that outlines the revisions you have made and where you have made them. Do this as you go along, using the table from earlier, and address every point, and follow these golden rules from the reference just down here. So be polite, be thorough, and answer with evidence. So a word on manuscript revisions. If the reviewer failed to understand something, it may also be unclear to a reader. Apologize for not making it clear, and if you think they have actually missed something, then politely point that out. In general, even if the requested change seems unnecessary, it's usually better to go ahead and revise with the goal of showing the reviewers that they were listened to and understood, unless it undermines your message or you have evidence to the contrary, so you can politely rebut what they're requesting. And here is an example of a response letter. And so you'll get this in the slides. And this is a nice example of a polite and professional rebuttal if you disagree with what the reviewer has said. So all of these things are not difficult in and of themselves. You have to be consistent. You need to check and recheck before submitting. Make sure you tell a logical, clear story about your findings, and take note of the reviewer comments as they improve your paper. This should increase the likelihood of your paper being accepted and being in the 30% accepted group rather than the 70% rejected group. So let's take a moment to look at why researchers are willing to review. The cornerstone of scientific and academic publishing is trust. Many reviewers engage as referees to play their part in the feedback cycle that is essential to validate new research and advance the field. They will publish papers as authors themselves and want a quick review, so will themselves do their best to referee papers when invited to do so. Being a reviewer can help you improve your own writing and presentation of your ideas, and it can serve as a stepping stone to leadership positions in your field, as it demonstrates your commitment to the field and your ability to evaluate others' work. More experienced referees see the value of mentoring younger researchers and enjoy seeing them develop and improve over time. Many researchers also review just because they enjoy doing it. Reviewing also gives you a sneak peek at the latest developments in your field, expanding your knowledge and expertise, and helps to advance your critical thinking skills too. Being a reviewer may provide opportunities to connect with other experts in your field and may lead to new collaborations and partnerships. Many excellent reviewers are invited to join journal editorial boards, and they themselves may eventually become editors based off that progression. So how to become a reviewer? You can ask a colleague who already reviews for a journal to recommend you, network with editors at conferences directly, or contacting the journal to see if they're seeking new reviewers. Elsevier also has the reviewer hub shown on the screen here. And this is where you can manage your reviewer tasks, claim your reviewer certificates, and your complimentary access to the products shown on the screen here, including Science Direct and Scopus. And then to finish, this is a nice kind of summary of what leads to acceptance, which you can read for yourself. And that is it. Over to you, Michaela, for the recap.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And especially when, of course, you have feeling well, so I can hear you. So thank you so much. So to recap, we are at the end of our presentation. And to recap is we gave you a sneak preview behind the scene of scientific publishing. We discussed which steps needed to be taken before you starting your paper, before you start write your paper. So remember, there is more than Google, even more than Google Scholar. You have a look at Scopus, have a look at Web of Science, depending on what you have access to via your institution, to find relevant content quick and easy and stay up to date. Then we covered how to choose the right journal to submit your paper to. Here, remember, when you start writing your paper, start this with having the first journal you have in mind. Yeah, so have a look at the guide for authors, about the reference style you have to use, if there is a word limit, etc., which will make your life so much easier. And also consider, do you need or do you want to publish open access? The answer is no. If you don't have to publish open access, you don't have to pay attention on paying a fee, because publishing doesn't require a fee to be paid, only if you publish open access. And if you have to publish open access, then please pay attention to your mandate. For example, if there are funding requirements or funding requirements from any of your co-authors. We looked at the author rights and responsibilities. We learned who is an author, that you shouldn't forget to mention an author who contributed. Avoid giving credit to gift authors and authors who did not contribute essentially to the publication. And yeah, be aware of the responsibility being an author as well. Like, for example, you all decide together on which journal to aim at to publish your paper. And then we looked at a bit of the understanding how an article is structured. We will share more details with you on the slide deck as mentioned, but also here as a guidance, if you're unsure, just check some of those previously published paper in that specific journal, which will give you a quick guideline immediately. We also covered the sensitive areas such as publishing ethics, plagiarism, duplicate publication. So please don't fall into the trap of plagiarism, even so if it's done unintendedly. We are sure that your institution is offering guidance on this topic as well. So please have a look at the website of your institution, usually published by the library. And then at the end, a peer review. So you have seen it's not a black box. Lydia nicely explained how it works. Let's remember that peer reviewers are people to help you make your paper better. They're not here to annoy the hell out of you, even though if it feels sometimes that way. Always feel free to reach out to the journal editor if you have questions, and if it's only to check about the status of your paper. Yeah, so it's a two-way communication. Feel free to reach out if you have not heard anything yet. Lydia mentioned the golden rule. So if you are responding to reviewers, be polite, be thorough, and answer with evidence. We have lots of guidance available. This is a link and a screenshot of the Elsevier Researcher Academy. So this is a free resource for everyone. So here we support mainly early career researchers on guidance in every step of their research career. So have a look at this website. You find live webinars coming up, you find recorded sessions, you find any guidance available on the topics we have discussed today, and even more. Next slide. And also there are other resources available. And next I mentioned, of course, your institutional library. So always check there. Also, if you have questions and you need, for example, which journal to publish in, I'm sure your library will be able to help you here. Or maybe you're aware of a journal editor at your institution. You could reach out to these people, but please don't stalk them. You could nicely ask if they would be able to give you any guidance here. And then, we covered the research metrics, the journal metrics you find in Scopus, the site score, the impact factor you find in Web of Science. And we have the UK VTE, where you can download information and guidance. And yeah, again, open access. Do you need to? Do you have to publish open access? Make sure you are aware of that. And also here, I'm sure the library is able to help you. Yeah, references and further readings from Lydia. So mentioned a couple of times, you will receive the slide deck from us together with the recording. And I think that brings us to the end of the session, Lydia. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And there have been actually a couple of questions I noticed. You just see there was a question. What if a co-author stops responding to communication from the rest of the team halfway through submission?
Yeah, that's really tricky. If the communication's through email, then you can try calling them, but if that's not getting through to them, then I would try and speak to your like graduate office or research office, because with things like this we tend to refer to the institution to try and resolve these issues, because ultimately they'll be generally the employer of that person. They'll be able to contact them, so do try to go through the institution if you can, and then yeah, I think you just have to keep trying. If they did contribute to the article, then they will need to be listed as an author. If you can't get approval for the final paper with them on there, you could also note that in the acknowledgements, you keep them as an author, but say that they haven't seen the final version. So yeah, it's a really tricky one, that one. Hopefully it's just a miscommunication and your emails have gone to the junk folder, and they can you can get through to them with an alternative email address or via telephone or knocking on their office door.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Lydia.
Okay.
Then we have another question. Okay, reviewer response. So if reviewers give you totally different comments on a certain section of the article, how do you decide which comments or advice to incorporate?
Yeah, so this is also quite a tricky one. I think try and take from those comments anything useful from both sets of comments. If there is, you have your own argument for your paper, so as long as you can justify why you have responded in one way rather than another way, then try to stick to your path. Don't try to have some kind of wishy-washy in the middle response, because that will kind of undermine your own argument for your article. So try to think which one best fits your paper, which will improve it the most, and go with that. And then if in doubt, you can always ask the editor to moderate there. So if you contact them and say, what would you prefer that I do? What would most improve my paper and be acceptable for publication in your journal? They're always happy to help on those kinds of points. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you so much, Lydia. There's a question in the chat. Is it possible to publish in 2 places? Brilliant question, important one.
So if it's new research, so original research, then yeah, you can publish wherever you want to, as long as the paper is entirely original and new. That's absolutely fine. If you're publishing the same paper in multiple locations, then that is not okay. That's a breach of publication ethics. So yeah, you can reuse the paper that you have authored in different ways. So you can share that for teaching purposes. You can get permission to reproduce part of that in another publication, or like a book chapter or something like that. But you have to get permission to do that, and depending on the copyright assigned to the paper when you published it. Obviously, if it's a fully open access paper with a CC BY license, then anybody can do anything with that paper, as long as they attribute it back to the original authors in the original publication where it appeared. So yeah, it really depends on on the situation.
Yeah, indeed. And I remember if it's a, for example, you could translate it, but also then it's not a new original paper, it's a translation, and you will mention that this is a translation to avoid the plagiarism which ministers unintendedly stepped into.
Yeah.
Good. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Still have time to address them with us. Okay, it's very useful. That's great to hear. And you can also follow up with us afterwards if there's any question popping up later. If you like, and we will address your question then by email.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me at this email address here. It's maybe not not obvious that that's my email address, but it is. So yeah, always happy to help.
Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any more questions. Well, then we thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon, and please feel free to register for the next upcoming free webinars. We will share the link with you again. The slide deck will be, there's one more question. The slide deck will be shared, the recording will be shared, so feel free to reach out if you need us. So there is another question. If a paper is rejected, can you submit to another journal?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So quite often, if your paper is rejected, the journal will recommend another journal within the same publisher where you might want to consider publishing. Then we've got the journal finder tool as well that you can take a look at and see if there's another publication that would suit your paper. But yeah, once you get a rejection decision, that's a final decision, and your paper is no longer considered as like in progress or under consideration. So you can submit to your next journal of choice after that. That's absolutely fine.
And if you decide maybe to submit it with another publisher, make sure if you got feedback from reviewers that you take this into consideration, because we know the world is very small. It might be the same reviewer you're bumping into for another journal or with another publisher. And imagine if this person spends like 3-4 hours on the Sunday afternoon reviewing your paper and you have not taken any of this into consideration. It's probably not a good start. Okay. Yeah, well, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us anytime. And again, thank you so much for joining.